We all know the names and faces of our state's most powerful elected officials, the ones who make decisions that affect more than 39 million Californians. But who are the unelected, behind-the-scenes movers and shakers in state government and politics? We'll take a look at the top 10 most powerful unelected players in California government and politics with our guest, John Howard, the editor of Capital Weekly, that each year ranks the state's top 100 unelected power players. Who are this year's top 10 unelected movers and shakers in California politics?
Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world, California Emerging Technology Fund, and
Fresno State, where bold begins.
The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Era Energy LLC, BNSF Railway, E&J Gallo Winery, and Harris Ranch and Inn. Thank you. From the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. In any state capital, there are those key power brokers who work behind the scenes to get things done. Usually they're only known to those in the know. Our guest is John Howard, editor of Capital Weekly, the well-read publication that annually publishes a list of California's top 100 power players. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you very much, Mark.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you, John. So,
I'm here.
Crazy year, right? With the pandemic. So, how has the pandemic changed the way you put this list together?
Well, it's changed it in two ways. One is that we typically do interviews for the top 100 in coffee shops, sometimes even bars, if we're lucky. Mostly coffee shops, mostly discussions on the street, sometimes in restaurants. There's a lot of face-to-face. That didn't happen this time. I think we had one or two interviews before middle of February. After that, we did none face-to-face, and we did it all by phone. To the extent we could do it, we did it by phone. That's first thing. Second thing is the list has people showing up on the list who reflect the pandemic around us, combating the pandemic, researching it, offering ways to get around it, dealing with that kind of thing. So it's a two-edged thing.
Yeah, it seems like, a lot of new names on the list. There's always a strong representation from labor and special interest lobbyists because they wield enormous influence at the state capitol. But I'm just wondering, you're kind of touching on it. What are some of the other groups that maybe had a greater showing on this year's list because of what everything is going on?
Well, I think probably the single most important aspect of that was we had people from the inner sanctum of the horseshoe of government operations closest to the governor. And that was a working theory behind this list. The closer you are to the governor, to the executive power, the more likely you'll belong on the list, regardless of title, Regardless of that, proximity to the governor, I think, is probably the number one criterion. Clearly, as you mentioned, we have organized labor. There are lots of money groups, but that's kind of our starting point. It's like ripples in a pond.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, noticing that the governor's wife is not on the top 10. I'm just saying.
We can,
Right.
Well,
there's a lot of very influential people that don't make the top 10, but they might be, 11 through 20,
sure.
Like the governor's wife, Jennifer Seibel Newsom, who's came in at number 11. I guess you can say there's lots of reasons why she's on the list.
I know a lot of this is subjective, and this is a perfect example. When Ann Gus Brown was here with Jerry Brown was governor. She clearly was an advisor and a close political cohort. She had been that way at the Attorney General's office for Brown and continued that close relationship when he was governor. And that was attested to by just about everybody who worked in the horseshoe. Jennifer Newsom, as far as we can tell, certainly, obviously, is close to the governor, but not in the same way, I think, that Ann Gus Brown was, who had developed policy relationships, who had vetted lawsuits, we're told, when Brown was Attorney General. We don't think Jennifer Newsom is quite in that close proximity to the governor politically that Ann was, and that's kind of
number 11 is no slouch. That's pretty high on the list. But you've got other people there like Alan Zarenberg with the California Chamber of Commerce. I think it was 17 on this year's list, and Elaine Howe, who's the California state auditor, some very influential people that you'd want to know, certainly if you're involved in state politics.
I think so too. And a lot of this really is subjective, and you can interchange them. I think Mark Ghilarducci is at number 15. He was the OES director. He's really playing an instrumental role in wildfires.
And OES, just for our audience, OES is the Office of Emergency Services. He's busy.
Pardon?
He's busy.
Yes, he's very busy, and probably should have been on the list last year, but made a mistake. So not that we make many of those, but we did. And he has a very good number this year. And we think that's representative of what he does. We're happy with that.
Another one you've got on the list this year, I noticed number 100, right? They used to say like in the NFL draft, Mr. Irrelevant is the last person drafted. Number 100 is anything but irrelevant. Lauren Rosenhall with Cal Matters, very good reporter. We've had her on the Maddy Report. And Cal Matters is an organization that's doing we've partnered with them on some things. They're doing some very impressive things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we thought we have number 100 as sort of a set aside for journalists. We don't know where to put journalists on this thing. And we don't really like to, in the sense that we think there are other people making policy and doing it as opposed to reporting on it. We do have some journalists. George Skelton is on the list. John Myers from the LA Times is on the list. But we try to set aside number 100 for a really good reporter. Carla Marinucci was there one year. Jackson Van Derbiken from the Chronicle was. Dale Kassler, I think, last year was. And now,
you've got some really good talent there. Well, up next, we're going to get into the top 10 most influential people involved in state politics. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. So who are the top 10 most powerful players in state government? We're talking with John Hauer, the editor of Capital Weekly, who publishes an annual list of the behind-the-scenes power players in California. We are now reaching the top 10. So here we go. Number 10 is Jason Elliott, the governor's senior counselor for housing and homelessness, who earlier was these are long titles, the Chief Deputy Cabinet Secretary for Executive Branch Operations. Why is he on the list?
Regardless of the title, and as you mentioned, they have some really cumbersome titles on this list, but regardless of the title, it's the function of the person and the proximity to the governor and the reliance by the governor on that particular person. And we run into this before with titles not really being descriptive of what they do. I think I had one person describe Jason as the governor's head man, the governor's idea guy. And it seems like whatever the governor is considering, he's in or near the decision making. That's how he was described to me, and that's really why he's not number 10 on the list.
Yeah. Okay. So number 9 is Catherine Lehman, who is the governor's legislative affairs secretary. Sounds kind of important. So what lands her in the top 10?
It's interesting about her is that her title, she's considered the general counsel of the Horseshoe, according to what we've been told. And so what that means is sort of takes the lead on legal action. And
can I stop right there for a second? I think our audience may not be aware of what the Horseshoe is. The Horseshoe is the inner sanctum of the executive offices of the governor in the state capitol, right? Right.
It's sort of the horseshoe-shaped office suite inside the Capitol where the governor's immediate and executive staff, the state's executive staff.
And right outside, you know where it is because it's got the bacteria bear right outside the governor's office, that big bear that people touch all the time. And
in the good old days, reporters could wander through there and interview people. And we thought when Jerry Brown got back, that would resume because he did it during his term. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was hermetically sealed, and at least for me, and still has been since then. So,
all right. So you were saying though about Catherine Lehman, the legislative affairs secretary.
Yeah, she's the general counsel, sort of the top lawyer to the governor, and that entails a lot of things. One of the things she's really been concentrating on is PG&E and PUC, but PG&E, which has figured in litigation and issues and negotiating for months and months finally came to some fruition, but probably be back.
Yeah, one thing. The next one on the list is Robbie Hunter, who heads the State Building and Construction Trades Council, which is an amalgam of about 450,000 construction workers in California. A slight move down from number 5 last year. Bottom line, very influential. I was a little surprised, though, because there was a little conflict going on there between him and the governor last year, but he still made the list.
Yeah, absolutely. There was conflict going on. And Robbie was not happy about that. I assume the governor was not happy about that either. They sort of patched it up, I think. Regardless of, he's one of those examples of inorganized labor, that regardless of the proximity to the governor, the union or union group that he represents is amazingly potent. And that really is the reason Robbie Hunter always has a high number. He's very aggressive himself personally and very active.
Yeah, they were involved with the gas tax a while ago, because there was a lot of construction jobs, and won a lot of favor, I think, in state government by helping that get passed. Let me go to number 7 on the list, Angie Wee, who's up from number 11 last year, another person with strong labor connections. She was with the California Labor Federation for 20 years. 8 years, she was chief of staff. She is, quote unquote, a special advisor to the governor. So what does she do for the governor?
One of the titles.
Right.
She's been described to us as the governor's political director. That may not be that accurate, but it's certainly partly accurate. She has political antenna for the governor, and she works on political projects, and she covers politics for the governor and is active that way. She's rather under the radar for us. She's very quiet to those of us on the outside. To those on the inside who know her, probably not. But she doesn't have a lot of high profile, except us, because we know how effective she's been for the governor, and others who know that and are close to the governor say the same thing.
Yeah. It seems with the labor connections, because with the California Labor Federation, she'd be very helpful to the governor, reaching out to that constituency. Well, up next, we're going to talk about positions 6 through 4. That conversation in a moment. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Capital Weekly editor John Howard about the top 10 most powerful behind-the-scenes players in California politics. The next 3 are all newcomers to the top 10. So at number 6, we have Richard Figueroa, one of the governor's top healthcare advisors. Not surprising he made that list based on the COVID pandemic.
Right. Yep, absolutely. This is, you asked before about what was the effect of the pandemic on the list. And when you look at the top 10 and the top 100, you really see that immediately. Richard Figueroa is a perfect example of that. Mark Galley, another one I think you'll mention in a minute or two. He also was on that list that high up and hasn't been on the list before. I think Richard might have been on it a while back, but not at this high a number. And this is directly because of the pandemic and because of the strategies the governor and the government is trying to do to deal with it.
Yeah, it's not just healthcare generally. That's been a topic that's been in the news for years. And now the COVID pandemic has just accelerated and accentuated that issue.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you about the next person on the list. Next person is Maribel Batcher, the president of the California PUC Public Utilities Commission. You say she's on the hot seat. Why is she on the hot seat?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, I think the governor felt that the administration needed to work with the PUC and fix it up a bit and overhaul it a bit, mainly because of PG&E. And I think Maribel Batcher is sort of a all-purpose fireman. She sort of goes in when there's trouble. She's a troubleshooter. She goes in and works it out. And I think she's done that here. So she was under a lot of public scrutiny and a lot of pressure. She's the person that went into the DMV. The governor had put her there, went to the DMV to reorganize it, streamline the operations. Before the pandemic, you may remember the DMV was getting all kinds of heat.
Right.
That was one thing she did. So she's sort of the she's sort of the Mrs. Fix-It for the administration.
Yeah, and they're dealing with the PG&E issue. They're dealing with what, $1.9 billion fine against PG&E. So she's responsible for a lot.
There's a lot going on with the PUC that gets coverage, of course. I think it's San Francisco. I guess elsewhere too. I just don't see it as much as I used to. But the PUC is a big player in California politics. Really needs to be watched closely.
Yeah. So the next one on the list, in number 4, is Mark Galley, the California Secretary of Health and Human Services. She follows in the footsteps of a Valley girl, Diana Dooley, who was Jerry Brown's Secretary of HHS. Great person. So tell me a little bit about Mark Galley. It's, this is always an important post. And you mentioned because of the pandemic, it's even more important.
Right. That's exactly right. And he is at ground zero of all of the reactions and responses the government makes. He works on policies when it comes to opening and closing facilities, schools, restaurants, you name it. He has a voice in that. So he really is at the center of a lot of things. What's amazing, as you mentioned earlier, is he comes from the outside completely, never having been on the list before, and this time is up high on the list. And we think it's totally justified.
Yeah, if you look at his background, I mean, he's the healthcare, a person for the governor. His background, his resume is incredibly impressive. He's got BA degrees in biology and biomedical ethics from Brown, a medical degree from Harvard, a master's degree from Harvard School of Public Health. My gosh, that guy was
either. There's several people on this list. They make you feel so inferior. They're such young upstarts. There are people at Harvard and Yale and Brown and on and on. And his wife, I think we mentioned it in the list, his wife is a ranking health person in Los Angeles County. So I guess all they do is talk about health when they're home, which is
yeah. I guess it must be an interesting conversation. But yeah, that's a big bureaucracy though. Just to kind of put a fine point at it, HHS isn't that one of the largest state agencies?
It is, and it's one of I think they call them the super agencies, and it's one of the agencies has a lot under its jurisdiction. The head of HHS talks directly to the governor frequently, all the time, as in the case of Galley. And also by default, I believe is still, like Diana Dooley was, the chair of Covered California, which is our way of implementing the Affordable Care Act. So it's a big deal.
Right. And so they're responsible for Medi-Cal, which is a huge part of the state budget. And that's, and no question, no wonder why that person ended up where they were on the list. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the top 3 most influential behind-the-scenes players in California politics. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Capital Weekly editor John Howard about the top 10 most powerful behind-the-scenes players in California politics, and we're closing in on number 1. So holding down the 3rd spot as the most powerful person in California politics and government for a 2nd year in a row is Keely Bossler, the governor's finance director. So what can you tell us about Keely?
Well, partly because she's the director of the Department of Finance. That's a major office, obviously, in state government. They're the ones that do vetting on everybody's budget requests throughout state government. And in the fall, every year, departments and agencies go to the Department of Finance to find out how much money they're going to have in the coming fiscal year. So she's at the center of disbursement and funds and recommending financing, as well as politics, because politics plays a big role in this. So the finance director on our list is always up high.
It's interesting. You mentioned this, and it's worth noting that she walks into office. She's got a $21.5 billion surplus, and now she's dealing with a $54 billion deficit, a $75 billion swing. Wow!
This is what makes government a challenge. You're flush one week and you're flush down the next week or the next year, and I don't think anybody obviously could predict that, but the combination of wildfires, pandemic, and a lot of other things have played in here. So she's really, we talked about the hot seat earlier for the PUC president. Well, the hot seat equally applies to Keely Bossler, I think.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about state finances is they rely so heavily on high income earners and the capital gains. The stock market so far has been doing okay. So, if the stock market tanks, California, they're really going to get hit. So, listen,
Ray Davis's time when he had a lot of one-time spending he used because capital gains revenues went way up, and of course, when they went way down, we were stuck.
Yeah. It's not something you can, right. It's something you can count on forever. So the top two are familiar faces. Number two repeats as number two. It's a person who's been a fixture in state government and politics for years. She was the former finance director for Governor Brown and Governor Schwarzenegger, and someone who Governor Newsom has referred to as a quote-unquote genius. This person is Anna Monsantos, who is the Governor Newsom's cabinet secretary. She oversees the executive branch state agencies, chiefs, all of them, and acts as kind of the key advisor to the governor administering the state's vast bureaucracy. No surprise that she's on the list.
Yeah, no surprise at all. And it's interesting here. She used to have the job that Keely Bossler has now. So she's very, very interested and knowledgeable about finance. As cabinet secretary, basically she runs the bureaucracy. She's the highest level bureaucratic representative in the horseshoe. At least that's how I describe her. And others may not see it that way, but she's at the top of the pyramid when it comes to the bureaucracy and state operations. So she strikes me as clearly needing to be on that list.
And she's, like I said, she's been a fixture in state politics for some time. Different administrations, Republican, Democrat. She's been around for a while. So that kind of gets us to number one. It does get us to number one. And it was also last year's number one, and that's the governor's chief of staff, Ann O'Leary. Why did she continue to be the most influential non-elected person in state politics?
I think the chief of staff, almost by default, has to be number one on our list. Now, it's true that Ann Gus Brown was not chief of staff, but in effect, she performed a lot of the functions as chief of staff, I think. And so the chief of staff, like Susan Kennedy was for years, they're the closest to the governor. They do a combination of politics and policy. Others answer to them. She's on every important phone call with the governor and with the staff as they iron out whatever needs to be ironed out that day. So it's clear that that the chief of staff has, in our view, has to be number one.
Yeah.
We talked, by the way, behind the scenes, we argued about, hey, should it be Anna Monsantos or should it be Ann O'Leary? And
maybe 1A and 1B.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and we couldn't find any reason to not have Ann O'Leary as the top person. So
yeah, well, I noticed that there's increasing balance between men and women on this list over time. Until you get to even the top 25. But I was wondering, what about minorities? Hispanics, African Americans. Are they seeing more representation in the top 100?
I think they're seeing a bit more. As far as Latinos go, and as far as women Latinos, yes, they're on the list. I think in higher numbers than they have been before. A lot of that's because of labor. You have lots of labor. You have many labor leaders who are Latinos and women of color. I think I don't have the exact number, but I think we have 7 or 8 African Americans on the list. It might be 9. And as a piece of the population, they represent about 6%. So they're a little bit higher represented. We've been wrapped from the beginning. I think our biggest criticism was you don't have enough women on the list. And we think we've dealt with that, or at least trying to deal with that. We think we have fairly well. I think, go ahead. Were you going to say
something? No, it's just a changing demographics in California. It's being reflected in state government. Well, John, I want to thank you again for being part of the program. Always enjoy talking to you about California's Top 10. John Howard with Capital Weekly, thank you very much for joining us. If you want to stay current with state,
Mark, I appreciate it.
Thank you. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Institute. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.